We have with us today Dr. Jennifer Gross, who is going to, and we want to welcome everyone. Um, she is going to be talking this afternoon and giving a presentation titled Utilizing DBT Concepts Without Being a DBT Therapist, Helping Clients with High ACE Scores. I'm just going to read the blurb about DBT. Dialectical behavior therapy is an effective therapeutic intervention for a myriad of client issues with a common etiology, which is complex trauma. This presentation will cover it in a brief overview of the pivotal ACE study and discuss the connection between toxic stress in childhood and the development of complex trauma in adolescence and adulthood. DBT was originally developed to work with clients who reported trauma histories at a very high rate. For example, the comorbidity for diagnosed PTSD in this group can be as high as 55%. However, being trained in DBT and or implementing a DBT program in every setting or under every circumstance is not possible. Counselors and other helping professionals can utilize key DBT concepts in their work with clients in all settings. These concepts can be the provider-built an approach where clients have increased participation and improved outcomes. So, Jennifer Gross, PsyD, Dr. Gross is a clinical psychologist at the Everett Clinic. She's been working in mental health with children and adults in Washington State since 1993. Prior to the Everett Clinic, Jennifer's worked in residential centers, in therapeutic foster care, at a regional children's hospital, in their outpatient psychiatry and behavioral medicine department, and in private practice settings. She's knowledgeable about dialectical behavior therapy, cognitive behavior therapies, and mindfulness-based therapies. Jennifer currently is based out of Snohomish County, where she lives with her family, chinchillas, dogs, and cats. And on a personal note, she's helped our family a great deal and will be forever indebted. So thank you, Jennifer, and we're really glad you're here. And I'll let you just take it away.
Okay, well, I'm going to share my screen. All right, so today we're going to talk about how we can utilize DBT concepts without being a DBT therapist. So part of the goals of this presentation is to talk about what is toxic stress, how does that affect children as they mature into adolescence and adulthood, talk about some of the key concepts of DBT. So we're going to parse through, it can be very complicated protocol-based therapy, and that most people are not going to learn the full protocol, or they don't need to, they don't want to, but there are some things that make it really effective and very effective with the population of individuals who would have a high ACE score. So, so we're going to talk about that, and then perhaps we'll be able to identify some scenarios where this concept might be helpful as I go through the presentation. And as Sue said, you know, just note your questions as we go along, and that we'll have time at the end to talk about whatever comes up for you as I'm going through this. I think most people have heard about the ACEs study, the Adverse Childhood Experience Study, where the CDC and Kaiser Permanente down in California, they had over 17,000 patients fill out a 10-question item survey about adverse childhood experiences. And then they looked at their medical files, and they looked for correlations between certain medical disorders and mental health disorders. And you know, what they found was astonishing, which was that for kids that had had adverse childhood experiences. So I've listed some. By no means are these extensive. And what they asked about was really about at the individual level. They didn't ask about institutional racism or kind of big system questions. They're really asking about in your house. So, the ACEs isn't meant to capture kind of a bigger system dysfunction, but for the child, did they experience violence or abuse or neglect? Did they witness it? Did they witness it in their home or community? Having family members with severe mental health issues can have a profound effect on children in the home, and especially if they die by suicide. Substance use problems, and then just kind of divorce and blended families. With some kids that is less stressful, but as a psychologist, I've heard so many stories about people where that has actually been devastating in childhood. So this is not a full list of circumstances, and but once they took all that data, right, and the National Scientific Council on the Developing Child, they came up with this phrase, toxic stress. And what they're talking about is that the fight, flight, or freeze reaction that happens when people are exposed to stressful or traumatic events. So if on the way to your office this morning, you were almost in an accident that was really close, then your heart was racing, your breathing sped up, these stress hormones shot out from your brain throughout, like all over your body, and that you probably felt a little spacey and a little shocky, and felt really physically out of sorts for a while afterwards. And then if you had to go back and explain to somebody about the car accident, some of it's a blur and some of it's not, right? So if you're a kid and you have a developing brain and you're exposed to neglect or abuse or seeing violence in your community, or seeing a parent with untreated mental health issues and maybe substance abuse issues, then you're having this almost car accident all the time. And it's can have a really significant effect on a child's growing brain to be put into flight, fight, or freeze throughout their childhood, especially if we're talking about crossing different developmental times, which in psychology, we typically break out as 0 to 1, 1 to 3, 3 to 6, 6 to 12, and then 13 to 18. And so if you're having clients who are talking about events that cross all those different times, then that statistically seems to amplify the negative outcomes from that. And what the ACEs study found was that these people that had high ACE scores, they were much, and it's just common sense, right? That people had major depression, they were more suicidal, they had more substance abuse issues, they had certain types of cancer. I mean, like, there were all sorts of problems that were connected to the people that had a really high score. And certainly for some people, they've had experiences where there was more resiliency. And in the ACEs study, there's a aspect of it where they focus on how to build resiliency so that people who might be exposed to this don't have the long-lasting effect. Now, I'm not going to talk about that today, but I just want to acknowledge that I'm only taking a slice of the study today and what I'm talking about. So if we're talking about, if I take a child from Snohomish that lives in an upper middle class neighborhood with parents who've been married for 35 years, who are boringly average, who've gone to the same schools, that's a qualitatively different experience than if I go to a kid in a home where maybe they've had multiple caregivers, maybe their parents have been with several different partners, that they have brothers and sisters from other relationships, that maybe there's not a lot of financial stability, maybe the parents or the caregivers' mental health isn't very good, maybe they use drugs and alcohol. They're going to have a qualitatively different experience. And as those people grow up into adults, teenagers and adults, then they're going to have different experiences kind of coming out into the world and trying to adult. And the truth is, like, we can't know who's in our waiting room, right? That there's going to be a lot of people that we work with, and until we get to know them better, that we don't know that this is maybe part of their background. But the people can have this that are everywhere. So it can, because not everybody in Snohomish is in a house with people who've been married for 35 years where everything is fine, right? I'm sure I can find plenty of kids in Snohomish that have families that maybe aren't doing very well, and that their ACEs score would be very high. So it's not something necessarily associated with financial instability, but certainly if you're talking about neglect, and having access to resources, it would make more sense that families with less financial resources would struggle with that. So so sometimes, if I have an 18-year-old sitting before me who's had different upbringing, I can tell in the way that they think about their future, the way that they go about problem solving and adulting, their ability to persist through frustrating events, and to continue to keep trying to achieve certain goals or milestones. I've worked with some clients where they didn't expect to live to be to 18 or 21 or 25, and they never really thought past that. And, so this is all the legacy of that. And, so part of it, though, is the ACE study. The really important part that I want to stress today is some of this is biological that has happened through their development, so that in psychology, we call this complex trauma. So where you just have layers of negative events that have happened over time, and that it's very typical to see people with anxiety disorders, mood disorders, substance abuse disorders long-term, who have high ACEs studies. And then in DBT was, developed in late early 1990s, late 1980s by Marsha Linehan at the University of Washington. And for patients that were not easy to work with, they were not responding well to other types of therapy. They tend to be very emotional, to be pretty dysfunctional. They were repeat admittance to the local psychiatric units, that they were, showing up at a higher rate. So a lot of these people were diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, and people with borderline personality disorder have a pretty high rate of trauma. Outside of trauma-specific disorders in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for psychiatric disorders, there's no other disorder that is so strongly associated with trauma. And some people have said that maybe borderline personality disorder is just complex trauma, that maybe that's what we should call it. I know that Marsha Linehan and her crew want to call it pervasive emotional dysregulation disorder. So this idea of toxic stress causing these changes in people's brains over time that cause them to be more emotional, more reactive, to have more mental health symptoms. So none of that has come to pass. But why does it matter so much that high emotion when you're a kid is going to affect you long term? Like, what is the connection? And really, we go back to that almost car accident that you had this morning in in my imagination. And if that happens over and over again, what if you're a kid and you don't get to change the route, or you don't get to change the way that you drive? What if, like, you're always in that car and there's nothing you can do about that? So do you sit there and calmly think about your options, or are you flooded with these stress hormones that happen when there's crisis? And for a lot of people, what all they remember is the emotion, and our brains are actually inclined to do that. So the way Mother Nature set up, the way we've evolved, is that emotion is king. So because if the building you're in right now catches on fire, Mother Nature wants you to be afraid and run for your life. Mother Nature doesn't want you to sit there and say, oh, is this fire alarm today? Is this really a fire? And do I really need to go? Mother Nature's say, get out so that so you can survive, and you're going to give out, your genetic code is going to continue. And for the people that didn't get out and didn't survive the fires, we don't have, they're not in our genetic pool. So this idea of strong emotion to motivate our behavior is, it's basic to who we are. And for people that have been exposed to a lot of adverse incidents, that they get conditioned to it. And then it doesn't even take as much. So, if I've been in a lot of building fires, it doesn't take much of a smoke alarm to get me to run out of the building. So, so this is a conditioned response is what I'm going to call it later. So then, and then you're not really learning about what to do. So if I have a fight with my friend and, we scream at each other and say unfortunate things, I might remember how angry I was or how upset I was, but I might not remember exactly what I said or how I got to that point in the conversation. Or, I'm definitely not sitting around and saying, I wonder what I could have done different directly prior to that argument that could have offset that argument, because my brain just wants me to focus on emotion. So in some ways, we have to retrain our brain to acknowledge the emotion, but also be able to think about these incidents more dispassionately, and to be able to think about how we could use skills in different situations. And, for some people, they might learn that naturally as the course of evolving into adulthood, but not always. And that's where DBT coping skills are very popular. So, and there's a lot of research that would say even just using DBT coping skills alone has been shown to help people with a lot of different issues. So you don't even need the full package to show impact. And that high schools have started to have courses about this, and to think about how can you start inoculating kids earlier in life to teach them explicitly how to use coping skills in emotional situations and to self-manage better. So an important part of DBT that you should know is that that DBT does not care about insight. DBT cares about whether or not you have the self-awareness to know that you should be trying a different skill right now. You don't have to remember it by heart. You could have it written down. You could have it in your phone. You could have a skills book near you to refer to. You could talk to another person who can remind you what it is. But that really it's just a self-awareness to use the skill, because we often have this idea, if we just get to the heart of the matter, that if we just understand better why we're showing certain behaviors, that would be enough to fix it. But the truth is, most of my clients know exactly what has happened in their past that have led them to function and show up in the world as they are today. They know the why. It doesn't help because that's not really a blueprint as to what to do differently. So, and that's really where a principle of DBT that's really important is that it talks about what's the blueprint so you can show up in the world differently. So, I mean, it's not that the why isn't relevant, it's just not central because DBT cares about functionality and survival. So, and so it would put the being able to explore these issues at a deeper level, that from a DBT perspective, that's for more stable people that are functioning well in society. That's something that they can do. But if somebody's not functioning well in society, then we don't start there. So some of the concepts about DBT that would work in any circumstance. And and I realize that I use this with all clients, whether I'm using DBT or not. I always think about the hierarchy of what is going on with them that is the highest target for me to hit, and what are things that are lower targets, because clients don't come into us and they say, here's my highest target for intervention. That they just come in and say, this is what's going on with me, blah, and they give us this smorgasbord of stuff. And if we're not careful, then we could be constantly problem solving the issue of the day and not really making traction on overall improvement in things that we want to do with them. So in thinking about hierarchy, we're trying to put the most important stuff at the beginning, and things that are still important, but they're just not our first priority and near the bottom. And I'll talk more about that. So DBT really focuses on having a strong relationship between the client and the provider. And I will talk about some of the validation strategies that you could use today when you leave today with anyone in your life that will help you diffuse situations with people that are emoting at a high level. And that DBT is really talking about learning a skill and generalizing that skill to different areas of your life, and being less effective ones that could perhaps be one of the reasons that you're talking to them. But the truth is, we could all be more skillful, right? And there's plenty of self-help books and blogs and articles on tips and life hacks of things that we could do different. And in that way, DBT, that's really what the DBT skills are, right? They're a really well packaged, well thought out list of life hacks that people can do. And I will talk about the different sections. And then also it focuses on teaching mindfulness skills. And for anybody who's sitting here during this talk and you're checking your email and you're looking at your phone and you're right, that it's very hard to be mindful in 2023. We have so much screens and things that pull our attention that we're constantly pulled away from being in this moment right now. And if I want a client to have self-awareness, where they can know where they're going to use a skill, then they have to be in the here and now. The other thing is that our brains focus on high emotion and often negative emotion. And so if right now I'm thinking about something, my almost car accident this morning, my imaginary almost car accident this morning, then I'm not really paying attention to what's going on now. And maybe I'm anxious now about driving home, so I'm thinking about that. And what I'm doing right now is not registering. So then I might not realize that most of my day was pretty okay. So, I get home and my loved ones say, how was your day? It was terrible. I almost was in this car accident, and then it's all I thought about all day long. But what about if there was a 7-hour block in there where I was kind of busy and I didn't think about it and it was okay? Then, then it just develops this kind of self-perception about how unhappy we are all the time. So being mindful also helps us just tune into the fact that there's a big part of our everyday life that can be fairly neutral. And, in that way, it can help give us perspective. So if you think about building a hierarchy with the person sitting in front of you, and, usually that there's an implication that something isn't happening. Either you're trying to provide a service to them, or they're getting some sort of treatment from you. And they're, so number one, they have to get the service. So I could be the best psychologist in the world, but if I only see a client in my office for 10 minutes a month, it really doesn't matter. So then for you, if you think about your specific situation, how are you going to make sure that service gets to that client? And that's the top priority. So other things are a big priority, but that's the top priority. So in DBT, there's a big focus on getting just getting people to show up. Because one of the things for people that have high ACE scores or complex trauma, this consistent showing up thing is actually pretty hard. It's pretty hard for them to do that. So, is it logistical, or are they having a hard time self-managing as an adult to organize themselves in a way where they can get the service you're trying to get? And then you're directly trying to help them problem solve that in a very non-judgmental way, because maybe they don't have the skills to do that. And we'll talk about my pet peeves about willpower and self-sabotage in a minute. But isn't motivational, because sometimes we offer things to people that they don't really want, they haven't really invested in. And so if they're not invested, if they're not interested, then how can we increase their motivation? Relational, how can I'm much more likely to show up for something if I like somebody and if I think they like me. So what can I do to kind of help that relationship, for people to come to me thinking that I really care and I actually want to help them in just my everyday interactions with them? Because that's really what they're going to walk away with, right? They're going to remember. I think there's like a meme or a saying that says, you don't, and I'm going to slaughter it now, that you don't remember what people did, but you remember how they made you feel. So, so that we're going to talk about strategies for that. And then there's this question of secondary gain. And I put in there, but tread lightly, because a lot of times we assume things about people, we assume intent about, or what they're getting out of something that may or may not be true. So, but let's say that I'm dealing with somebody who's in community health services and I'm trying to help them get a job, but the only jobs I can help them get are very low paying, but then they're going to pay well enough that it might disqualify them from housing or other services that they actually need. How hard are they going to work to get this low paying job to disqualify themselves from these other services? These are real issues that have to be problem solved, right? Okay, so my pet peeves in DBT. So you should know in DBT that even DBT therapists, when we talk to each other about the people that we're trying to help, we talk about them in as kind, neutral language as possible, even when we're just talking to each other. So there's this assumption that people want to get better, that people don't wake up in the morning and say, I'm really going to blow it today. But that people really do want to improve and participate in the type of services that we have to offer them. So we have to believe that, even if their behavior is not lining up with that, because we might think, oh, well, they would problem solve the transportation thing if they really wanted to be here. Not always true. Maybe the problem solving the transportation thing is exactly what they need you to help them with. And it's only in legal environments that we really talk about people's intent, right? But we're not in court. We're not trying to prove if somebody had malintent. And the truth is, we can just never know what somebody genuinely intended. And people are bad self-reporters at this. And especially if you're talking to kids or teenagers or even adults who have been in a lot of systems, they're going to tell you what you want to hear. So, sometimes I have clients where there's some custody issue and, a parent will leave me a message and say, oh, well, this kid got really angry at school and they didn't do any of their homework because while at their dad's house over the weekend, this happened. And then I get the kid in front of me and I say, oh, so what happened? And they'll say, oh yeah, da da da. And I'll say, is that why you didn't do your homework? And they're like, no. But they know that to the authority that they're reporting to, that's a reasonable thing to say that's going to get them off the hook. So then, so they'll just tell the person that so they can stop talking about it. And so then we have to be really careful, because then you have clients who are going to tell different people different stories based on what they think that you want to hear. If we're all trying to figure out what the intent was. So DBT cares about what happened, when did it happen, where did it happen, for how long did it happen. That it really gets into the weeds about the details. And then we're not trying to make assumptions along the line. We're just trying to collect data about what happened. And, maybe if I did, we might call this a behavior chain. So maybe if I was collecting a chain of events and every time somebody skipped dinner, they yelled at their partner around 8 o'clock, then, then I think over time we could start to say, here's a link. What can we do there? But, to say the person deliberately skipped dinner or wanted to vent on their partner, that may not actually be true. And we're losing people by saying that to them, right? So people feel very shameful and guilty for not adulting at a higher level. So, we just have to be careful when we're talking to people about their intent. The other thing is that what I hear a lot is about clients who self-sabotage. And in DBT, those are skill deficits. If a client has the ability to has the skills to do something, complete a college class, then if something happens in week 7, 8, 9, and 10, which I see all the time, that suddenly they're not doing well in class, then I don't, my automatic assumption isn't, oh, they're just sabotaging their success because they feel more comfortable as a failure than they do as being successful. And there is some truth that when clients start doing behaviors that they haven't done before, that people start raising the bar for them. But overall, if the client could finish the college class without failing or stop attending or stop doing their work, they would. This goes back to the whole thing that people don't wake up in the morning and say, I'm just really going to blow that college class because I don't want people to think that I can complete a higher education. It just doesn't make any sense. And I think self-sabotage as an idea can be not only inaccurate, but shaming. So I think that we have to be I'm very skeptical when people tell me they've self-sabotaged. Then when they're saying that, I'm like, really what? Because what happened? Where did it happen? How did it happen? How long did it happen? What were you doing before? What happened afterwards? So that's what I'm interested in, because usually I can find some common links that are happening as to where that interrupts more skillful behavior. And, I want to address that directly. So DBT doesn't want to talk about big concepts about self-sabotage. They want to say, where are you going to do your homework? How are you going to know it's time to do it? Do you have an area to do it? I mean, like, it gets very specific, and you can do that with anybody. So if you're talking to a client or you're trying to provide a service and and you feel like for some reason they're having a hard time receiving that service or benefiting from it, then it's time to get into the weeds about what's happening. Because usually once you get into it, then you can figure out pretty easily why it's not going the way it should. The last thing I'll say about this is willpower is not a skill, but it is embedded in American culture. Just try harder, just do it, right? The Nike motto. And the problem is that willpower only works if you're in a good mood. So, I mean, let's ask everybody, whoever got a New Year's resolution, they got highly motivated. Let's say I'm going to give up apple fritters. I don't know why I would. I love them. They're delicious. But let's say I decided they're not good for me. There's no nutritional value in them, and I'm just going to stop eating them. Well, when I first start doing that, it's easy because I'm pretty motivated. I'm feeling pretty happy about it. But, as time goes on, a week, 2 weeks, maybe I don't get enough sleep. Maybe I'm starting to come down with something. Maybe a couple stressful things happen at school or work or in one of my important relationships. And then I walk by a box of apple fritters that's open for everybody. Suddenly, I can't remember any reasons why I wanted to stop eating apple fritters. I'm going to eat 3 apple fritters. They're delicious. And then there goes my New Year's resolution. And so this idea that we could use willpower, and I have a lot of clients that will just say, I'll just do it. I'll say, well, how are you going to get your homework done? I'll just do it. That's not a skill, and it's not a plan. So that's wishful thinking. So, it's okay to kind of get into the weeds and say, well, I hear a lot of motivation on your part. Let me, but I really like it when we talk out a full plan. So I call willpower the anti-skill, but I cannot tell you how often it comes up when I work with people as something they're trying to resolve their life problems. Now, some of you might be writing down, but Jennifer, I don't, I have a lot of clients who aren't very motivated. And so it seems like they're actually not very committed to what we want to do. So how do you help people be more motivated? Because people want to succeed, but sometimes they need help being more motivated and staying more motivated to keep a behavior going. So then, first we have to ask ourselves, are we even on the same page as to what we're trying to do? So sometimes we're not. And that's important to resolve out of the gate. That have we identified, is it really motivation, or is it skill deficits that they don't really know how to do it? So if I have a client who's never completed a college class and they tell me that it's not that they don't know how to do it, it's easy, they just self-sabotage, I'm very skeptical of that report. Contingencies is kind of what happens next. So, if I almost get into a car accident in the morning and then I'm really dysregulated, and then my boss says, oh, you don't have to do half the work that I was going to give you, just take it easy. And then people are super nice to me. That's okay, which is human nature, right? Human nature is that we want to reach out and be warm and be helpful to people that are struggling. But sometimes now we can inadvertently reward or reinforce this inability to function. And, on a short-term level, that's fine. And that, we have to be human with each other and help people where we can. But sometimes we create these contingencies with people where that is actually, this is other people might call it a secondary gain, where it's actually more rewarding to them to not be skillful or not be motivated. And if they were very motivated and skillful, some very major reinforcement might disappear. So a common thing in DBT with clients is that people are very warm to them when they're upset until they've been around them long enough that they see the person's upset all the time, which is pretty typical of people with borderline personality disorder. Then people get desensitized to them being upset. And then the person gets upset about something and they're even more greatly upset than they normally are. And then their support system comes back and says, oh, this is different than all the other times they were upset. They're really upset this time. Should be really nice to them. And then, so over time, you could create this person who presents with an increasing level of problem, because that's when the warmth and the support is offered. But then naturally, that people, withdraw it over time because we can't stay at the same level all the time. But for some clients, they need that level of warmth and engagement all the time. So, so it's more, in some ways, we can kind of create a monster in the way that we help people. So sometimes we have to look at that. Is our help helping, or is our help actually making things worse? Do people seem to be getting worse, even though we're helping them with a lot of things? The fourth one is this conditioned emotional responses. So you go back to the adverse childhood experience questionnaire, and if you've been raised in a household where you see people react a certain way to conflict, express their anger in certain ways, talk to each other in certain ways, then over time that's being role modeled. That's what your environment is responding to, and you yourself could start doing the same thing, even though that's not your intent. So I have a lot of clients where they'll say, oh, and then I lost my temper, but I hate it when I lose my temper, and I tried really hard not to lose my temper. But that that this is something that has been part of their kind of behavior program for a while, where they do certain things, so we have to help them respond differently. So even DBT would even see a conditioned emotional response as just a type of skill deficit, and that and to work with the person on conditioning a different response. And then the last is just the way that people think about things, cognitive processes. About, if you think about all the pull yourself up by the bootstraps, and that you don't need help. You just need to try harder and have more willpower. And people have all sorts of ideas about the help that we have to offer, and that really influences their willingness to accept services from us. So it's important to know that. I think during the pandemic, that was really clear about how people's cognitive processes interfered with their ability to accept services for a lot of pandemic related things. So if we're trying to increase commitment, then there are ways to do it. And DBT wasn't shy about stealing things from other areas where they're very successful. So they stole some sales techniques that people use. I mean, in mental health, we talk about pros and cons. Motivational interviewing those are pretty typical, kind of why people would want to try different things or do different things, act a different way. But that's one way of doing it that's pretty common. A different sales technique is to do what's called foot in the door, door in the face. So a foot in the door is where like you're just trying to get commitment to like a small thing, like well, would you be willing to do this for 10 minutes? And then over time, then you're just trying to expand it. Like if you get the early success, a lot of times I can get clients to commit to doing something small. And if they feel successful at it, then I can get them to do much bigger things. So that's one way to go at it. But some people, it's kind of like if you go to go buy a car, and the car salesman, here's this great car, I'll give it to you for $30,000. And you'll say, what? I don't have $30,000. That's way too much for this car. And they'll say, oh, but I have a deal for you today. And, for you, I can give it to you for $26.99. And then so here was this big demand, 30,000. And then suddenly this other one just seems like such a good deal. And, and you can do that with people where you say, well, I need you to come twice a week for 3 hours at a time. They'll say, what? I can't do that. Well, could you come an hour a week? Yeah, no, I think I could do that. So these are all ways to, and I guess I'd probably feel bad about it in doing this with people if I was actually selling them cars. But what I'm trying to motivate people to do is to engage in healthier behavior, to be more skillful, to achieve the goals that they're telling me that they want to achieve. So I don't feel so bad about persuading them or trying to get more commitment for that reason. That may be what they need to engage more fully in what I have to offer. Some of it is just classic shaping where, maybe somebody can't, they're, instead of being 15 minutes late, maybe they're only 10 minutes late, and then they're only 5 minutes late, and then they're only 1 minute late. Like sometimes like you got to work with the behavior in that things aren't going to turn around on a dime. I think devil's advocate is a lot like motivational interviewing. Like, maybe you shouldn't do this. And then linking to past commitment. So talking to people about the goals and things that they said they wanted, and you're really just trying to connect it up and be like, well, if you could do this, this would really help you with this other thing that you told me was really important to you. Like that can increase people's commitment if they can understand how those things connect up. And the last is sometimes we're offering services to people in a market where there's not a lot of options. They don't have a lot of options to choose from. So we can talk about how what we're offering them is perhaps voluntary, but that they could choose not to. They could choose not to be here, even if that meant that they got in trouble with their probation officer, or their spouse got mad at them, or their doctor lectured them when they came in next because they didn't participate in the service. I mean, like people could choose to have negative consequences from not engaging with us. But then we can also choose, hey, maybe there's not a lot of Jennifers out there who are going to listen to this specific type of problem. So it's really trying to get people to think, well, maybe I got to make the best of this because this is what's going on. And I didn't put this in the slide, but DBT has this idea of alternative rebellion. And it's not unusual for clients that I've worked with sometimes to want to argue with their treatment team, not with the world, but with us, the people who are trying to help them. And then we talk to them about this idea of alternative rebellion, like how could you rebel not towards us, but kind of still, establish your independence or do it in a slightly different way. And adolescents go for that a lot, but I don't know that adults really like that so much. Treatment interfering behavior. So DBT in the hierarchy, there's first you got to get the treatment in, and then once they're there, like how can that be an effective exchange of services? So then, and you have to think that it's not just them, it's us. How many times are we showing up chronically late for appointments? We didn't do what we said we were going to do. We're not prepared. And sometimes that has to do with just the demand upon us in our jobs, which can be intense to be in a helping profession. But also it could be that there's something about interacting with that client that we've been kind of dragging our feet and hoping they didn't show up, and hoping they'll quit maybe. Or professionally we don't want them to quit, but maybe it's been a struggle to get that relationship with them, and we just have to consider that. So so if there's anything that you think that you're doing that might be making it hard for the person to receive services, then that's as worthy, to think about and problem solve on, than it is just what the client's doing as well, right? Like this is 50-50. And then going back to talking about clients in this non-judgmental way. So, for example, if my teenager, if I say, "Hey, do you know where any towels are?" and they scream at me, I think that my kid's a spoiled brat who's never wants to help out around the house. I'm gonna have one emotional reaction. But if I go and my kid snaps at me and I say, "Wow, my kid's really irritable today. I wonder if they have some towels," then then I could continue to persist with my plan to find some towels in the house, and but it elicits a totally different reaction. Right. So the thing about being less judgmental, about talking about the clients we serve, and even like this is from the inside out. This is the way I think about the people I serve. It's not just lip service, because it helps me. And I'm sure it helps them, because it has to come across to people that I don't secretly think terrible things about them. But, it's really about motivating myself. And I think in some ways it can open up problem solving instead of having a strong emotional reaction. And again, what DBT cares about is the what, the when, the how often. You got to get into the weeds sometimes about things. A lot of clients want to talk to us about the idea of the crisis of the day. And quality of life issues can be hugely important. Like quality of life issues could be an eating disorder, substance abuse, homelessness. Food insecurity. There could be major quality of life issues, but even these have to have a hierarchy, because you can end up talking about them in a way that you don't get traction and things don't improve for the person you're trying to help. So in DBT, we rank quality of life issues. And this is where you have to be willing to kind of wheel and deal sometimes, because if I have a client who comes in and they really want to talk about this conflict that they had, but I really want to talk to them about transportation and homelessness, then we're going to have to figure out how to split our time. So, again, that has to do with that relational issue. And how do we have relationships with people that have a lot of complex trauma? And, part of it is using validation strategies. DBT has 6. I didn't list the 6th one because it's difficult to quantify in a 1-hour talk. But the first one is simple. It's be attentive. So I can't talk to a client and be on my phone at the same time. right? The moment I'm looking at something else while they're trying to tell me something, they think I'm not paying attention. I have this little glass cleaner for my eyeglasses, and during the pandemic, early on in telehealth, I'd start to get restless sitting here in front of my computer after a couple clients in a row, and I'd start doing this thing where I'm folding and unfolding my little glass cleaner. And I had one client ask me if I was texting during our session, like thinking that I was having an entirely different conversation with someone else. And I was like, no, I'm folding this uh, uh, stupid thing here, but that's really important. Like the moment the client thinks that I've disconnected from them, I can't pay attention to them, then that creates problems in the relationship. Kind of paraphrasing, that's basic active listening skills that everybody in human services is ever taught. Mind reading is kind of guessing. It's kind of guessing what's going on for the client, and they'll correct you. So let's say that a client came on a Hope Link for services. They got there 2 hours early because that's what Hope Link did today, and then I was 20 minutes late for something that didn't have anything to do with them. So then they've been waiting 2 hours and 20 minutes to talk to me about this really important thing, and now they don't have as much time, and that has to be a really frustrating experience for people. And so, so I could say, wow, this is a really frustrating experience for you. You're trying so hard to be here on time and to be ready. And then the universe is kind of interfering. And people appreciate that because then they're like, oh, okay, Jennifer gets what's going on for me. I'm not saying it's good. I'm not saying it's right. I'm not saying that's how the world should be. I'm not saying we shouldn't try and figure out transportation that doesn't do that, or I don't try and figure out things in my schedule that might cause me to run late. I'm just saying that, just kind of acknowledging that to people. Sometimes as helpers, we don't want to say anything that makes us or other people look bad. Even if clearly the client that we're talking to has had a negative experience with something, we don't have to protect everybody in the world. We could say, wow, well, it sounds like you had a really bad experience with blank. And they're like, yeah, I did. So you're not saying you hate that person, or, you're agreeing with the client to do anything. You're just kind of acknowledging what they're really feeling. And if you get it wrong, they'll just say, no, I wasn't frustrated at all. I was just happy to be here in the air conditioning. It's really great. And I actually had no idea what I was going to talk to you about today, so it doesn't matter that you were late. So if you get it wrong, they'll correct you. And the other thing is the idea of validating that based on their past history or something about them that, something is hard for them. So, if I have a client who's talking about how difficult it is to organize things around their house because they have this chronic health condition that actually was just diagnosed and they haven't had much intervention. And then it's easy to say, well, man, you haven't been feeling well months to years. It's no wonder that all this stuff is piled up, and then suddenly, that you can't just go and like whip it out as if you were perfectly healthy, because you're not. That's a very validating thing. That doesn't mean I'm not going to go back and try and problem solve that. I'm not saying that's a good thing or a bad thing. It's just reality. Right. So then, if people in the past haven't been successful at something, it's not surprising that they wouldn't be successful now. For me, what that means is that there's some skill deficits. So there's some problem solving that has to occur, because somewhere in there, people got some willpower, some I'll just do it sort of thing going on, and then they didn't. So, that's what I think about things like that. And then validating based on normalized stressors, who's stressed out during Christmas season, who was super happy if they went to go see the Taylor Swift concert last weekend, or one of the 2 nights, so it's all this type of stuff around. There's these things going on in the world that cause people stress, whether it's good stress or bad stress. And it's okay to say, that that's going on for people, because of course it's influencing them. And I'll say, during the pandemic, that was the first time in my life as a provider where I was going through the exact same thing that every client I was talking to was going through. And that was a really different experience as a provider. It was much harder than talking to people about things that are going on with them, but not with me. But it was easy to emphasize with them. So what are these DBT coping skills? Now, you could take a weekend class, you can get a handbook. I encourage you actually to look at different handbooks, because there are some that are geared, that are highly technical, that part of the people that are going to do a comprehensive DBT program, they're going to get the manualized DBT skills book that is very detailed, has multiple handouts for different things that you might be talking to people about. But then you have much more user-friendly versions for teenagers and adults, or maybe that it's been modified for different people, say like in a substance abuse treatment center or something like that. So, I mean, you know, part of this is like, you have to look for what it is that you want to know. Anybody watching this right now could learn about mindfulness if they looked it up on the internet, they put it into a YouTube feed. You could get people, you know, you could read blogs, you can have free lectures online. You can, there's lots of ways that you can learn the material, and maybe learn the material in a way that's most interesting to you, that you're going to use it. But DBT as a whole, this is what the coping skills that they're teaching. So first is the mindfulness about being in the now, having some self-awareness about being in the now, but also being able to train your brain to be in the now, to be here. Distress tolerance, which is really how to manage crisis without making it worse. So, you know, if you think about all the stressful things that came up this week that were frustrating or annoying, that you had to problem solve, you know, for a lot of people with complex trauma who have long-term anxiety and depression, those things seem really overwhelming and they can really get bogged down in it. So now people are not intended to live by distress tolerance. Like, we're not, you know, a lot of distress tolerance is, you know, how do you tolerate something until it passes? Because a lot of times, you know, I might be really frustrated about the lack of towels, but I get over it, right? You know, I don't need a long-term strategy for that. But I can't live my whole life doing that. You know, that there has to be more stable long-term skills that are going to help me along than you know, but in the distress tolerance category, there could be 100 things. So, you know, 200 things. And they're really, what you need are 10 to 12 things that you're going to use. Some of them are low intensity, meaning that you're not too upset when you use them, but you definitely need to have one or two that are for the high intensity situations. And I cannot tell you how many people tell me they're going to watch TV or watch a show or, you know, scroll through Instagram or something when they're super upset and they don't understand why it's not kind of pulling them in, and it's just not intense enough, right? That things like playing a musical instrument, learning to do something new, like a new language, a new recipe, a craft, some sort of intense physical exercise, something like that, something new, that those things are highly distracting. So, you know, for most clients, they've not developed the high distraction one. That's really where they need to figure out. There's also a lot of skills in there about self-soothing. And, you know, I could do a whole weekend workshop on any one of these topics. So, you know, so I'm not getting into them because it's impossible to cover them in a 1 hour talk. But I just want to give you an overview of what kind of coping skills that you could use. And I think that if you were interested, then you would have to kind of explore that, look at the different things that would apply to your particular situation. And this is what a lot of people do. Other providers who are not trained in comprehensive DBT, they just want a little distraction activity for the client to do, or some self-soothing activity for the client to do. That's what they're looking for. And those things are perfectly helpful. And there's, at this point, you know, I mean, DBT has been mainstream for, you know, 25, 30 years, that there's so many versions that you can find. Just me looking around while I was making this slideshow, I found so many different ones. So you don't have to reinvent the wheel. So interpersonal effectiveness is really about managing our relationships. It's about trying to figure out how to balance the things that we want to do, our priorities, with demands, the things that are put upon us. Like, how do we balance those? How do we ask effectively for things or say no to things? A lot of clients don't understand this idea that I've worked with about rewarding the person for saying yes or saying no when you want them to say yes or say no. Like this idea that you want people to feel happy about giving you what you want, and that sometimes you can demand that people give what you want, like in a safety situation, and sometimes you shouldn't. And trying to figure out when those situations are, like, how do you have a rubric to figure that out? How do you maintain relationships, which is, that's just the human condition, is wanting to have good relationships with your family, your friends, yourself, which is the self-respect skill. Talking about explicitly, again, saying you should do this, but don't do this sort of thing in that situation, and then practicing it, tailoring it to the person you're talking to, trying to help, like, what happened, when did it happen, how often did it happen, even with relationship stuff. So and then the last one is emotion regulation, and learning emotion regulation. That's that's really the peak of the mountain for DBT, for just learning how to understand what emotions you're having, and kind of how can you influence it so that you don't feel that your emotions are some type of flu that you're experiencing and you just have to wait it out. But how can you actually modify it? So, for people are taught the different emotions and common names. And, DBT talks about that there's 10 core emotions. And, if there's any psychologist on here, already that there's no way that psychologists out there all agree that there's 10 core emotions that have evolved with us. But DBT uses that as their model. But, people will vary in what they say about it. But the idea that there is a common physiological reaction to, say, anger is a truth, right? That people report very similar sensations when they're angry. That's accurate. People have what's called an action urge, that when they're angry to approach or attack something they're angry at, like that is an accurate statement. So sometimes for clients who can't figure out what they're feeling, knowing those different parts of an emotion can help them go back and say, oh, I guess if I wanted to yell at them, I was actually kind of mad. Then that can be really helpful. But also, how do we engage in problem solving? And, so if a client wants to go to a job interview, how do we help them work through their anxiety about how they're going to be in the job interview? And, how can we try different, again, problem solving strategies? Not willpower. It's not, hey, just try not to be anxious. It's really, what strategies can you use? And then you try them, and then you go back to the person, and did they work? And if they work, that's great. But if they didn't, then you're like, okay, well, let's just try a different strategy. And and that is teaching the client that it's okay to fail at trying to use a skill, that not being successful at everything you try is perfectly normal and human experience to have. And that there's many strategies that people can use, and that we just keep trying. We're just going to keep trying. So I haven't met anybody where we've tried everything out there. There's always more. There's always smart people out there coming up with new ideas about strategies, life hacks, right? About what to do. But in this way, like, we're directing it not how to, I don't know, like clean my cupboards or something, or fold my towels so they look like a pillow or something. But, we're really trying to do it towards emotions. Like, we're saying, okay, well, anxiety is a real problem that I have. Fear is a real problem. Let's problem solve that directly. If anger is a problem I have, how do we problem solve that directly? So that this idea that even that's open to modification. And then really trying to help clients learn about how to accept things that are miserable, but cannot be changed. So, that we have plenty of clients where they've lost someone, or they have a medical issue, or, there's other really sad facts that have happened in their history or maybe are going on right now, that all we can do is get through that. And it's really important to kind of teach clients how to radically accept these things. Like, how can we kind of help ourselves tolerate things that are really difficult, so without making our lives worse or engaging in strategies that are going to cause us a lot more problems. So I think in my slides that I'm talking about the different skills that I just said verbally, but we're going to run out of time, so I'm not going to go over those. So in review, so if you're thinking about how can I use DBT, develop a hierarchy. So how can I get that service in? How can I have a higher quality service when I'm with them? How can I rank order different problems so I'm not just talking about the crisis of the day? How can I build a stronger relationship in just the way I interact with my clients so that they want to talk to me? How can I figure out how people can learn and then apply skills in different situations? And we're not even saying good or bad. DBT just says effective or ineffective. And then how can we teach people to be more in the here and now, to live their lives right now in the here and now, not what happened before, what might happen in the future, but kind of what's going on right now. And if you're doing those things, then you are using DBT concepts whenever you're doing, and I hope it helps. So that is the end of my slideshow. So I'm going to stop sharing. I don't know how this question and answer thing, I don't know if people put questions in the chat, or I'm open to suggestions.
Thank you, Jennifer, for your presentation. If anyone has any questions or comments, please feel free to unmute yourself or type them out in the chat.
I think that was a a lot of information, and
Oh, it was. It was.
I-
So I don't know if anybody, maybe nobody has any questions. I don't know.
no, I have a question. Trying to figure out how to get my picture up here, but I can't figure it out. So I'll just be anonymous. My question is trying to get off of the problem of the day and be able to talk about what you want to talk with them about. Can you kind of go into that a little bit more?
Sure. You know, I think in some ways that for some clients, if you know them and you know they might derail the time that you have with them by talking about something that's really important to them, but using up most of your time, and then the agenda that you have to talk to them about, you're not able to do that. That sometimes I'll come in with a client like that and say upfront, what's our agenda for today? Oh, well, before you get into it, let's just make our agenda. And then you're going to wheel and deal. So the person's like, well, I really need to talk to you about, you know, my broken bathroom or something, then, but you really need to talk to them about, you know, taking their blood pressure or something. I don't know, whatever it is you're doing with them. Then you're kind of saying, well, we're all going to do both. Okay. So we are going to talk about that. But first, maybe we're going to talk about some of the stuff that I need to talk about. And then we're going to save a lot of time. And then, you know, as long as the person knows that you're going to give time to talk about what's really on their mind in that moment, they will, usually they'll go along with that. Usually they're fine. So some people, they're just worried if they don't get it out there in the beginning that they'll either forget or it'll never get covered.
Okay.
Is DBT best used one-on-one or also effective in group settings? DBT skills are taught in groups primarily. So, and people tend to like groups. it's taught in a very didactic, psychoeducational sort of way. So if you are in a group, you're not really encouraging people to talk about things that might trigger other clients in the room, or maybe the group conversation might go down a rabbit hole you don't want it to go, then you just make that part of the rules. But most of DBT is based in group settings. So, and then there's an individual component. But like I said, a lot of places, they just do DBT skills training. They don't even do a DBT informed or a DBT individual therapy that I didn't talk about, which is pretty intense. That's why, the DBT intensive is 2 full weeks of training to get like the basic of it. So it's a lot. It's a lot. That's a great question, Jessica. Well, I think this is good. It means that I explained things so well that everybody that everybody's perfectly satisfied. I don't know. It's a beautiful day. Maybe people are like, oh, well, it's time to get out there.
It is a beautiful day, but
well, certainly people can like I'll put my, I don't know if my email, I'll put my Gmail in here. So if people have questions that you don't want to ask in front of the group, but you wanted more, like feel free to shoot me an email and ask me questions. Or if you're looking for particular resources, I'm always happy to talk with people. And of course, I can always be found at the Everett Clinic now. So I'm in the Center for Behavioral Health there. So, but I do appreciate everybody giving me the time today to have this question.
I think, can I say something? I think
Yes.
that for some of our clients that I'm trying to think about this, that are on Apple Health or Medicaid, may have better access to you. Myself and another public health nurse and a behavioral health specialist, we teach some classes mostly on resilience in homeless shelters. And we hear a lot that there are the therapists that are available to them are just not that great. That there's a huge turnover, and that they really don't get very far with their really complex trauma problems and their histories, and nothing good happens. They go and it's just not worthwhile. But it sounds like they might be able to access you if they can get a PCP at the
I don't know.
clinic.
I mean, I always think, Sue, that there's a lot of smart, motivated, intelligent providers out there that can help people, not just me, right? I mean, like there's many people like me. I think the problem that you're talking about is that a lot of people with Apple Health are in community mental health. And community mental health attracts typically a lot of unlicensed people fresh out of school who need their supervision hours so they could get licensed, so they could get a higher paying job. So then those people are given a caseload so large that there's no way that they could put the time and energy into doing, say, a bigger DBT program, though they do have DBT groups. So then in a lot of the community mental health centers, you can only see somebody for 6 months every other week, and then you go off because there's such a huge waiting list. And that'd be very hard for anybody to get better under those circumstances, right? To even build an attachment to the therapist. And then once they get licensed, a lot of people leave. So, in the community mental health centers, they're often publicly funded. So then they can't invest in this training. And, it's true that the easiest way to access DBT, like people that are very well trained in it, are people that are wealthy who can pay out of pocket. There's plenty of DBT providers for them, but for people that don't have a lot of resources, there's not a lot. When I set up private practice in Snohomish County, I deliberately took insurance in South Snohomish County because I knew from working at Seattle Children's Hospital that there were not DBT providers in South Snohomish County who took insurance. So, so there's a population there that needs to be served, right? So, I imagine what your clients are saying is true. And that's one of those bigger system issues, right? That's the whole system would have to be changed so that the most complicated, least resourced clients are seeing some of the most experienced providers out there. So until that system is changed, so that's true, then I think that, what your clients are talking about probably continue.
I'd like to add something there. I'm in private practice and I started doing Apple Health like 7 years ago. And it didn't pay. It paid like $60 an hour.
Yeah, yeah.
But what people, I'm trying to get my camera to go on and it won't. What people don't understand is they now pay $99 a session. I have seen Apple Health people, and it used to be there's 5 different insurance companies that pay you, and you have to first get a Medicaid number and then go out to the 5 companies. If you just go out to 2 companies and you are a new counselor, you only have to be an A to get a Medicaid number. And most of the insurance companies, you only have to be an A to start getting with them. $99 a session. Your phone will ring off.
That's decent, right? That's decent reimbursement. I think a lot of more private practice people would do that. I'm not sure how.
One other thing I'd add is I have actually seen some homeless people 3 times a week for a year and never once got questioned by the insurance company.
That's pretty remarkable.
And
they need it.
Yeah. So, and I don't think private practice people know that. And if you're thinking of starting a new private practice, great way to start.
That's true.
My 2 cents.
I guess I don't feel like my question is completely answered. My question is, if you have had complex trauma and you have a lot of issues and you really need to see somebody that's experienced and you have a PCP at the Everett Clinic, couldn't you access somebody like yourself?
Sure.
The person could and actually get someone who has a lot of experience versus somebody at the community mental health agency, right?
There is a way, yeah. So there's 2 types of psychological services that you could access in a medical center like the Everett Clinic. So one are behavioral health providers that provide typical hour-long sessions. There's groups, things like that, though there is a high number. So it's not like private practice where somebody would see me every week at 10 o'clock or something like that. They're still competing with a lot of other patients to get on people's schedule. But the clinicians who tend to work there tend to be very skilled, for sure. And then the other way is that there are psychologists and master's level therapists, social workers that are embedded typically in primary care and pediatrics, where they're able to do, a 20-minute intervention. Maybe they could schedule somebody to come back to see them for a half an hour, that sort of thing. So then, so they're trying to do kind of less formal interventions, but interventions that have emphasis. But that is a way to get involved. And I think most people don't know that you could ask to see a behavioral health provider at your medical center.
So even if you are a parent of a child that sees a pediatrician, can you maybe get some marital counseling that way? Or would it just be revolving around the child?
No, like there are people who get couples counseling. For sure. I think you just have to ask. People just have to
Okay.
ask. They could say,
Okay.
they could say, well, I know I know we're here for Tom, but
Mhm.
things between me and my partner could be better. Is there any counseling available? They'll just put in a referral and let you work
Okay.
it out with the people, the managers of the.
Okay. Okay,
behavioral
that's
health.
really helpful. Thank you. Got a hand up.
That Patty Eileen, I think, was the one who was talking about the Apple Health now
Okay,
paying
so
better.
she's talked. Okay, great.
Yeah, that's a public service announcement. That's good to let people know for
Mhm.
sure. Because a lot of people are scared to take Medicaid clients for that reason.
And if you're ever around somebody starting up, saying, I think I'll start a private practice, encourage them to get a Medicaid number and start that way, because I guarantee you, you'll get lots of clients. I turned down probably 6 requests a week, and I haven't taken a new client in 2 years.
Yeah. I mean, like that's
Because
there's a need. There's a need. Yeah.
There aren't enough of us with Medicaid. And I have gone out and marked everywhere, my website and all the insurance sites, that I'm not taking new clients, but they still call.
Of course. Yeah.
Thanks for sharing that, Penny. Okay. Well, Jennifer, we want to thank you so much for being here and sharing your expertise. Been really interesting and thought-provoking, and we really appreciate it. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Well, and certainly I'm sure people could get the slides from Melinda. I'll send them to Melinda right now.
Okay.
Okay.
Yes. And we'll send out the recording, and with it, we will send out a evaluation form so that you can give some feedback about what was helpful and what questions you had, that kind of thing. So yeah, thanks to everyone for being here, and go out there in the sunshine and enjoy your rest of your day.
All right.
So thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yep, thanks.